Hello, everyone. It's Brian Hunt, and welcome to another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. I hope you've enjoyed your spring so far, and depending on where you're watching this, hopefully you haven't gotten flooded or overly too much snow. It's been a crazy March throughout the country, especially on the western part in California and up the Northeast. It's got slammed. So don't worry, April's just around the corner, and hopefully you get some springtime temperatures and early summer. So hopefully that's going to work out pretty well for everybody. Kind of along those lines, though, weather. Weather has been obviously changing and shifting quite a bit. If anybody's seen it, what's going on in California, where you had years of drought. Now they're going to have probably more water to do with it, which causes issues. And obviously changing temperatures, increasing global temperatures, shifting patterns. You're seeing, as we see in the world of insurance and construction, increasing severity and frequency of issues. And how does that sort of tie into construction? Well, part of that is that, the question is, do you wish to be resilient? Are you going to be static in the way you do things? Or are you going to look for outside opportunities to make your buildings in your office towers, apartments, hotels, whatever the case, make them more resilient so that when the bad things occur, when that high wind, tornado, hurricane, flooding occurs, can your building be more resilient? And with resilience comes the type of materials you decide to use on the construction of your projects. We also know, it's kind of thinking about the three little pigs. You got straw, you got wood, and you got brick. And obviously brick in that situation was the stronger of the three. And so there are obviously more materials that are being used these days that sort of come up with sort of options to make your facility more resilient. Obviously everybody's very familiar with lumber and timber. But as we'll talk about this later, commercial property insurance carriers don't really like that too much. Now you're starting to see mass timber, and everybody knows about concrete. But another material that can be used and has been picked up in sort of interest, especially with sustainability and resilience, is steel. And so to that point, I wanted to have this opportunity to invite my next guest here, Mr. Brian Ward. Brian is a senior structural steel specialist at the American Institute of Steel Construction. For people who don't know about the AISC, it's headquartered in Chicago. It's a nonpartisan, non-for-profit technical institute and trade association that was established back in 1921 to serve the structural steel design community and construction industry in the United States. Its mission is to make structural steel the material of choice by being the leader in structural steel-related technical and market-building activities, including specification and code development, research, education, technical assistance, quality certification, standardization, market development, and advocacy. So with that, I figured in this sort of climate we're dealing with as far as, being more resilient and being more sustainable, at this time, I'd like to add my friend, Mr. Brian Ward. Brian, how are you, sir?
I'm outstanding. How are you?
Good to see you again. So before, I know you and I were at the same event this morning at the local Biz Now in Dallas, and unfortunately, I didn't get to see you, or at least I didn't get to chat with you. I kind of came in and out, but for people who don't know about Biz Now, it's sort of a global organization that has a lot of development in commercial real estate. And I think Brian would testify is that based upon this morning at the event downtown and uptown Dallas, still plenty of people interested in commercial real estate. And there's plenty of, even around that area, there's a lot of construction going on.
I agree. It was another great event. I know the State of the Market typically is one of their best events annually. I did see you on the other side of the room, and I thought to myself, I could work my way over there, but I know I have a dedicated time to speak with you. So thank you for the great introduction. Thank you for a little background on AISC and who we are. But I would like to go modify the Three Little Pigs and add a steel option because I think it would win over the other.
I totally agree, and I think I've got a newsletter that's going to probably focus on that in the near future. But Brian, before we get too far down the road, I always like to try to start the conversation with asking my people kind of a throwback to that educational game. Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? So where in the world is Brian Ward today?
So I am the senior structural steel specialist here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I live in a suburb called Wiley.
Right.
Our little coined phrase is wide awake Wiley. It's kind of funny. People used to know our little suburb for our ski shop, where we sold I guess secondhand ski supplies, snow skiing supplies,
Interesting.
bibs, everything. But unfortunately, that was a building that was built back in the early 1900s,
Mm-hmm.
and it did not take resilience into account, so it was actually lost to fire.
Oh,
But some people still remember us for that. So.
oh, that's interesting. I did not know that. So,
Yeah.
well, Brian, I want to get into a great conversation. I think it'd be very interesting about as far as the purpose of steel and current construction methodologies and resilience and sustainability. But before we go down the road, Brian, let's just get a little know about you. So tell me, Brian, where'd you grow up?
So interestingly enough, I grew up in the DFW area, but I grew up on the Fort Worth side.
All right.
So actually grew up right outside 820 Loop in Fort Worth. Went to Southwest High School, for those that are familiar with the area. Okay. So I do understand the sometimes fun sibling rivalry between Fort Worth and Dallas.
Yes.
And depending on who I'm talking to, I may harken back to my early days of growing up in that market. But went off to Texas A&M, which I think is you referenced earlier. Mm-hmm. Spent some time in the actually dipped my foot, or I don't want to say dipped my foot, but started my experience in the steel industry out in Arkansas. Okay. And worked my way back to the metro area. So I've been in the steel construction, design, management, market development aspect for going on about 25 years.
Great. So kind of circle back for a second. So A&M, when you went off to A&M, which is a great engineering school, and also very heavily involved in construction, did you know going to A&M that you want to be an engineer or you want to be in construction, or did it sort of evolve while you were there?
It evolved while I was there, quite honestly. I think so. I have two wonderful kids, one of which is finishing up his time out in Texas Tech. But the reason I bring that up is children tend to go into the profession that their family was in. So I actually started my career at Texas A&M with an electrical engineering major because that's what my dad chose. He actually worked for General Dynamics, but I quickly learned within about a year that didn't pique my interest. Started going back and remembering as a kid driving through Louisiana, where my dad is from, in Florida, where my mother is from, and I was always enamored by steel bridges. Likewise, driving through urban areas, whether it be Dallas or other urban areas, kind of noticing the structures. So went down civil engineering, and as I went down civil engineering, you kind of have the concrete versus steel option. And even as a young up-and-coming engineer, I could easily see that steel was the best choice.
So that's interesting. So at a young age, you're talking steel. What is it that you find, I guess, appealing to steel? We'll put it that way.
When you're in civil engineering, ultimately you go through statics, dynamics, different design theories, but ultimately you come down to material design. And the design process and design logic behind designing steel, I gravitated towards it quickly. I was able to assimilate it to what I already knew at the time, as opposed to some other systems and other techniques. But really, it came down to that and learning that side of it. And then ultimately, come to find out that was the opportunity that was there waiting for me when I graduated. So a little bit of both. But.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously, before you joined the ASIC, you had a career as far as working in different firms and doing different projects. So maybe kind of give us an evolution of your career before you got to the ASIC.
So out of school, I actually started out in the steel industry, working as a design engineer for the open web steel joist industry. For those that are familiar, it is a subset of the steel industry, if you will. So I started out in design there, but it was in Arkansas. It was not in an area that starting a family that, for whatever reason, when you start a family, you have other influences, not just your own. We'll just put it that way. So we wanted to get back to the DFW area, but so I started there in a very specialized kind of focus of engineering, not necessarily consulting. From there, I evolved into engineering responsibilities of a castellated beam product. For those that are familiar with that, it's a innovative steel product that's available in the market. Then I went into kind of sales management, sales support from a technical aspect, went into business development, actually started or represented a steel broker in the DFW area that was coming out of the '08 recession. They were trying to explore whether their model would make sense in Texas, because Texas, as we heard this morning, was quicker to recover during some of those downturns or cycles. Likewise, I do have experience from a project engineering standpoint with a national general contractor, DPR Construction, for those that are familiar with them. I spent some time there. So I've seen the industry from the design side, the management side, the sales side. I haven't seen it from the architectural side as far as sitting behind that side of the table, but I do interact with architects on a regular basis, and am eager to learn as much as I can from that side of the industry.
So before we start, I gave a little brief summarization as far as what is the AISC, but maybe you'd like to give maybe a better explanation as far as what is the role of the AISC?
So AISC is the American Institute of Steel Construction. As you mentioned, we just celebrated our 100th year, I guess last year, technically.
That's correct.
But we are a technical institute and a trade association. Some other industries, you have different organizations that represent both aspects of that. But we handle both. So we handle the research, we handle the design specifications, code adaptations within the design of structural steel. From the trade association side, that I like to say is the side that I, within market development, that I kind of work in. So we're more of the advocacy side, and maybe pun intended, but we like to bridge the gap between the steel industry and the design industry, and connect those two sides, because we see value in mitigating risk. We see value in providing the insight and the knowledge base that our industry has to offer, that for whatever reason, historically, doesn't connect in all cases to the design industry. So it's that's my elevated view of the organization.
So Brian, obviously you've been in Dallas-Fort Worth for a while, and you've seen firsthand, just like everybody else, just how rapidly this region is growing. There was actually a recent article in The Economist just talking about how the Texas region, specifically, you go from we call the Texas Triangle, Dallas to Houston to Austin, back up. This is growing rapidly in the sense that Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is expected to be the third largest metropolitan area in the United States, surpassing Chicago by 2030. And then, according to The Economist, by 2040, the population in Texas will probably exceed California. So a lot of people coming, a lot of development going on. And obviously, in the past 7 years, you've been sort of seeing on the ground. When you think about someone's out there, whether it be an owner, architect, thinking about this project, they got this vision. What are some of the thoughts that you try to advocate or bring to the table as far as why should someone use steel on a given project versus steel like lumber, steel gauge, concrete? I mean, what are some of the driving factors that the steel industry would advocate as far as the use of steel?
How much time do we have? Right? Quite honestly, we feel that there are 6 prime differentiators from kind of practical benefits of steel. So not getting into technical aspects, because I think that conversation could be different if we want to go down that road. But knowing this audience and how kind of diverse the audience is, I think really one of the main points is that how can a building material mitigate risk? How can a building material create a win for you on your project in ways that you may not think? So we feel, and I think most people would feel, that you need to build a quality standard to ensure that you have consistent performance on your project, consistent performance in the material, and that the design intent is achieved with what goes out onto the job site. That's a great way to reduce risk while still maintaining that high level of quality. And with that, AISC has really one of the most robust quality certification programs of any building material that's available in the market. So again, we developed this quality management system with our focus being primarily on error prevention instead of error correction. Kind of a fun way to say it, but we go in and we actually educate and improve the processes within the steel industry, within the fabricators, to really emphasize that. So where contractors were developers, really where any industry, you feel the need to potentially go qualify everyone that bids or is a sub to your project, you can kind of think AISC has already done that for you through our certification program. So kind of high level, I would say that's one of the premier reasons of consistency, meeting expectations, reliability through that certification program is one of the biggest benefits to utilizing structural steel. We can also go into resiliency, strength, sustainability, all of those different aspects, but I think we may get into those kind of organically through the conversation. You're muted, Brian.
Sorry. Thanks,
No
Brian.
So it's not a webinar until somebody has to say that. Right?
No, it's true that, I'll be conscientious as well. So you bring up a good point, Brian, because you and I were at the conference this morning, and the first panel talked about, what's going on in trends in the marketplace. And pretty soon into it, they were talking about what some of the risks or pressures. And one of them flat out, the panelists mentioned about as far as commercial property insurance rates increasing 30%, or it's like a year basis. And obviously from my job here, working with my clients who are owners and developers, general contractors, and helping with property placement and builder's risk, you can see that firsthand. And that goes back to, 5-7 years of steady inclining upward, up to the left, increasing severity and frequency of claims, and especially from weather, whether it be high wind, flooding, not just the Gulf Coast, but like in the Midwest. There's a lot more, things that could go wrong on a project, and these claims are getting more severe, and insurance companies are trying to make a profit. And, back in my day, when I used to work back at Care, I used to work for FM Global, which is an HPR underwriter, which is, building, advocating for being highly protected risk, because the knowledge or the concept is if you build it to be highly protected risk, less likely to have claims, therefore better underwriting attractiveness, therefore get more attractive premiums, or at least rates, and then better cares. Because in this market, I can tell you, if you're trying to build stick framing as a multifamily, good luck. I mean, as far as getting a decent coverage, or the most prime cares that you think about are out of the market. You have to go to wholesale markets. New York Times has even written articles in the sense that, if you're trying to get, there's I guess conversation as far as developers not building on, out on the beach or close to the water, because they can't get the insurance to cover it, because everything is being sort of looked at with a fine-tooth comb in the property markets. If it's susceptible to an exposure, then you're less likely to get it. And that goes back to like the adage of we were made reference to, but steel is more resilient as a material than other products. And so, Brian, I'm kind of curious, when you're talking to your clients or people in advocacy, what is sort of their maybe thought process as far as why they try to go to? Does the concept of resilience become more in play, or even is it flat out they just want to get better insurance?
I think everybody reverts back to the low-hanging fruit when that conversation comes up, and a lot of times it comes back to cost, right? Like, ultimately, that's where it is, and cost of insurance, cost of premiums, and potentially reducing that where you can. Resiliency is a very interesting conversation, and it's evolved really over the last probably 5 to 10 years. I think personally, it's kind of an offshoot of the sustainability conversation, but from our perspective at AISC, resiliency comes down to a system or a material's ability to absorb and recover from an extreme event, right? You referenced the Gulf Coast environments and different issues like that, but really all of the aspects that make steel the ideal choice. And when looking at a commercial project, it's the strength, it's the durability, it's the elasticity. We can go into some more technical aspects of it, but really it allows for an ease of inspection. So that's really So the material itself is strong and durable, but when we're talking about kind of structural system resilience, the way that steel is erected, fabricated, it results in an easily inspectable building. Grammatically, that sounded funny as I said that, but the ability to actually go in after an event and see your steel frame, evaluate it, bring in the experts to look at it. If there is localized damage, it can be mitigated, repaired quickly, relatively inexpensively. Whereas other systems, sometimes the critical connection or the critical issue is sometimes hidden beneath the surface. So ease of inspection really adds to that as well. So we really talk about community resilience in terms of the building, in terms of the material within that building, and then within the structural system that you utilize. Again, trying not to get too terribly technical, but those are some of the conversations that are becoming more and more prevalent as we talk about resiliency, mitigating risk, and controlling potentially some of the rate increases that we heard about this morning.
No, absolutely. Because if you're approaching an underwriter at a carrier, in the day, you're trying to make that underwriter feel more comfortable taking in that risk from your balance sheet, placed on the insurance company's balance sheet. And anything, especially in this market with a hard market property, they really want to understand what they're looking at. And anything that can be done, and I'll give you an analogy. Say, about 2 years ago, when lumber was going through the roof, every default for apartments and multifamily is go do lumber versus say steel or steel gauge. I remember talking to a developer here in Dallas, a general contractor. Lumber got so expensive that they actually put the numbers to it and decided, well, what would happen if we use, say, steel gauge on this? The lumber was a little, still do the steel gauge is a little more expensive, but what the thing is, they found the savings to be so much more dramatically better, more expensive using the steel gauge versus the lumber as far as the builder's risk policy was concerned. They found substantial savings versus using this timber or stick frame. And more importantly, once that property got transferred to the owner, then the owner going forward, when he's trying to go to the markets to get carrier insurance, is going to find a lot more open and willing partners on the carrier side, especially the top lane carriers, to insure that property going forward versus something that had been built as stick frame. So I think that's when I talk to people, it's like, my background, I do insurance, but I'm also a CPA, I got master finance. And so one of the concepts we think about is discounted cash flow. And too much times people develop something about it. It's instant, build it, sell it, move on. But if you really look at it and you try to make the argument, the entire, the long-term 5-10 years down the road, you take the discounted cash flow as far as the potential savings that you might see from an insurance perspective by building more resilient, using more steel, could be pretty substantial in the sense that it makes the project more viable, in the sense that it makes that pro forma look a lot more attractive going down the road. And I think that's where too often I see, and maybe Brian, maybe you have the same issues, like developers think about, some developers like build it, sell it, flip it, move, and they don't necessarily have the short, they don't have this in a long-term plan, but those who maybe owners, developers plan to keep it for an extended period of time, using a little more resilient materials obviously could be very beneficial to them.
I completely agree. I think this morning we heard it referred to as the long haul strategy. The idea of you do have developers that want to build it and flip it. If so, we have some conversation points around that. But really, when you're talking about the long haul, if you're talking from a structural engineer's perspective, we're designing structures to have a serviceable life of 50 years or more.
Yeah.
And we heard a little talk about it this morning as well, that adaptive reuse or adaptability of a system of a material is becoming more important. In other words, what is this structure going to be 30 years from now, 20 years from now? If you're talking parking structures as an example, you may go to one meeting and you hear that parking garages are evolving and they're no longer going to be needed, or the way that you utilize them is going to be changing. Likewise, this morning we heard about office space that's having to be repurposed into residential. And it was the first I'd really heard the idea of kind of office spacing, office bay lengths, make it potentially difficult to convert to residential. So you still want the longer spans, which first I'd heard that, which was very interesting. But structural steel really is easily modified. It has a lot of reserve strength. If you had to increase floors, plan up front for the long haul or adjust it in the future, because of its lightweight and the process in which it's constructed, you can expand vertically, horizontally. So really that conversation of value isn't just about, you don't maximize the value of your structure if you're looking at just building it, flipping it.
Yeah.
That's really kind of a speed aspect. Like if that's what the developer or the person's looking for, there are aspects to the way steel is done that can benefit that, but really to maximize that adaptability and the resilience of the structure, steel provides a great answer to that conversation.
Yeah. And there's another term I like to sort of talk about as far as sustainability. And help me understand, maybe some people, I think I know it to be dangerous, but steel can be obviously, you have, virgin steel and you have say recycled material. And like a lot of times you might see like, like I was watching 60 Minutes recently, talking about how the aging fleet of some of the U.S. Navy ships after a while get decommissioned and they get to scrap metal and they get torn apart. And a lot of material, I assume, goes right from there, goes to a foundry, gets melted. Is there any engineering difference, or is there preference from steel, virgin versus recycled, or has the technology got to the point there's no difference? I'm curious how that works.
That's a great question. And the sustainability conversation around structural steel is probably where we plant our flag the most. I guess maybe second only to strength. So the steel that's produced domestically, there are 3 domestic companies with 6 locations across the United States that are producing a roughly 10 million ton capacity from a domestic standpoint. Their processes to produce structural steel, mind you, not gauge metal and some of these other products, utilizes a system called an electric arc furnace. The reason that's important is the raw product for steel that's used in commercial construction, 93% of that comes from recycled product. Okay. It's not mined. It's not any kind of ore or some of the, we'll call it traditional processes from the past. So likewise, steel is 100% recyclable. Hence the ships you were talking about that are decommissioned, that get deconstructed and sent back into the process. So from the recycled content, it's by far the most recycled material on the planet. Steel is.
Did I know that?
Some people may not realize that.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah.
So the electric arc furnace allows for an extremely clean process as well. There's been a 75% reduction in CO2 emissions than traditional methods over the past 40 plus years. So we're very proud of the performance and the advancements and the innovations as a steel industry that we've had to this point, but we're in no means kind of sitting back on our successes. There are some additional things that our mills and that our members are doing to improve that sustainable conversation.
Awesome. Okay. So just take a second here for everybody who's sitting here watching the show right now. You have the ability to post a comment, and please look in the sort of bottom right-hand corner of your LinkedIn tab of the page to be able to see the ability to post a comment. If there's a specific question you want Brian and I to address, please let us know, and I'll even bring it up on the feed here. So Brian, actually, I want to go on a little bit of a tangent because our show here is called Risk On, Risk Off, and it's all about risk from different angles, and obviously we're talking about from a steel perspective as far as sustainability and from resiliency. But part of that kind of ties into, we need to touch about it. We've all sort of noticed the past couple of years, and there's been a lot of things that have been going wrong in the global economy. Throw a pandemic on there, which has seen a shutdown in product coming out of China. Now raise onto that, you have the war in Ukraine, which I did not realize how much raw material comes out of Ukraine as far as pig iron is concerned. And now you throw into the fact we've got rising tensions with China and concerns that something might occur in the South China Sea, which could again result in disruption in supply chain. Are you starting to see more steel production in the United States coming back online, or are we seeing from the other sources, Central, South America, Mexico, whatever? What's going on right now with respects to, if you can comment on that, supply of steel from out the world?
I don't have the current data on imports, but I do know for a fact that domestic production capacities were strengthened recently because of some efforts that took place on Capitol Hill. But capacities there, from all indicators, the domestic capacity could satisfy the demand that's there. But as far as supply chain, just to put people's thoughts at ease, the steel supply chain is a fully integrated process, readily available domestically, which it's still surprising that people don't realize that. But also we have not only just the mills that produce domestically, but their service centers, a large local network or national network of service centers to where you can get that material as well. So through that process of supply chain and the international influence or concerns there, because of the recycled content, which is the raw material for production of structural steel, supply chain, we're not anticipating there to be issues there based on some of the international things that you we'll just put that way that you referenced. So
yeah, fair enough. Okay, very good.
But ultimately, if we could read the future, we'd
I'd be in Vegas on place putting money down at the sports book. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, speaking of, Sweet 16 starts today, so yeah, definitely doing that.
And how's your bracket so far?
It was ruined day one. Yeah.
So
that's okay.
I think there are a lot of things that happen, you know. But
my Aggies got upset by Penn State, which our president Charlie Carter is a proud alumnus of Penn State. So we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, very good. So Brian, as you sort of go around, you advocate throughout Texas, and you know your point with ASIC. What do you see as the sort of the near future? I mean, obviously, we can't predict the future, but what are the trends you're starting to see, or whether it be conversations you have with general contractors, owners, as far as the adoption of steel, or maybe new ways it's being used in projects that maybe haven't been used in the past?
That's a great question. Ultimately, that's what we're looking at. So we have access through an organization called Dodge Construction Network, where we track material construction starts on a quarterly basis. If you go back and look at the 2022 numbers, I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear that warehouses were far and away the largest sector for construction nationally. Dallas kind of followed that. But most people are surprised to hear that the second largest non-residential, this excludes single-family residential. That's something we don't really include in our figures, but the second largest non-residential building sector is parking structures. So there is a renewed focus within AISC to magnify or accelerate kind of the knowledge of steel and its place within parking structures. There's an opportunity there, and that's a trend that we're seeing. A lot of people are surprised when they hear that the first parking structure was built in the early 1900s, and it was built out of structural steel. I think that could go down a lot of different tangents, but that's one thing that we're seeing. Also, right now, actually coming back from the event this morning, saw some hotels. It seems like that market may be coming back, right? The hospitality market may be coming back. We call it multi-story residential. Whether it be condos or apartments, that's still a very active and strong market in the Northeast. So those are trends that we're seeing moving forward. But as far as changes and new ways to look at steel, I would say first and foremost, it's going to be utilization of structural steel in parking structures. And there's some real practical benefits for that. So
I'd be curious, can you maybe, without the use of visual aids here, I'm trying to envision, how does steel get incorporated more into a garage? It's like, I'm just looking kind of out my window right now, and I'm looking at the parking garage that's part of this 3-building structure here, and it seems like most everything I'm looking at is concrete. As far as the grading, you pull in, you go up the ramp, that seems like it's concrete. Is it steel? Basically, you're either having a concrete ramp, it's steel now, or is it just combining the two? How does that work?
That's a great question, right? So ultimately, you do have some calculations on the ramping and when do you transition from the steel, or in a sense, the slab on grade, the foundation, whatever you want to call it, into the elevated structure. Ultimately, back to the conversation we had a moment ago about adaptability and what is this garage going to be in the future. I think some of the practical benefits of steel that are making it make sense right now is that it can adapt to potentially increased loads. Some people may be surprised to hear that a parking garage has about half of the live load of a traditional office or residential tower, as far as what it's designed to from an engineering perspective. So the ability for structural steel to increase those loads without necessarily increasing the weight or increasing the overall mass of the concrete. Your perception that the majority of the garages you see right now are concrete is fair. And there are some reasons for that, namely fire resistance and the perceived need for fire resistance in a parking structure. If you look at how parking structures are codified as far as the type of construction, it's a low hazard storage facility. Because of that, code allows you to fit under some thresholds to where you don't need passive fire protection. Plus, there are some code changes coming to the parking industry that are requiring automatic sprinklers throughout parking structures, whether they're enclosed or open, for those that are familiar with that terminology. So the need for passive fire protection on a structure is being mitigated, for lack of a more detailed conversation. So it's pointing towards steel having a lot of practical benefits, as I mentioned before. But I don't know if that answers your question, or if you were talking more like how is it laid out, how is it framed out.
Well, or I can maybe this part of it also visually, like if you're trying to envision like a parking garage, where is the steel used? Is it, I mean, again, the skeleton, is it part of the actual, if I was to go into, like, say, one of your parking garages made of steel, and I'm driving into it and I'm going up the ramp, is that ramp going to be steel, like the actual, okay, so it's really using steel throughout the entire process?
It's using steel throughout the process, even the ramps. Obviously there's hybrid solutions for all that, but steel columns, beams, slab on metal deck. Sometimes you can do hybrid systems where there's steel frames with precast double T decks or post tension decks. So trying to stay away from the technical aspect, but if you want to go down that avenue, Brian, we can absolutely do that here.
I could ask a question, I wouldn't understand your answer.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So, but one thing though, this is basically a recent phone call I had with a developer here in Dallas, home residential builder, and it's kind of a different business model, because this particular company, which is looking to build more homes here in Northwest Dallas, like up in Tarrant County, or at least Collin County. They were explaining to me they actually have a small manufacturing facility where they're using recycled steel for the purposes of building homes. Now, I haven't got too much further in the details, but I'm curious, because I sometimes I'll drive around Dallas and obviously see these multi-million-dollar homes being built, and still a lot of heavy predominance of stick frame. But I do see certain larger, 1 million up homes that where I at least do see steel, whether it be maybe the box component or the skeleton, for lack of a better term. Is that a trend you're seeing increasing more? Is it something that's more of a function of the value of the home, how big it is, that we probably need steel, or at least at that point you probably can afford the steel, or are we just seeing like an upward trend where more steel or steel gauge is being used in residential?
I think all of those play into it. I would say it's going to be your higher end homes, and it goes back to some of the things we started off this conversation with, namely the resilience. And if you're going to have a home that's valued at that price point, you're going to want a material that provides the ability to absorb and recover from extreme events, right? Structural steel can do that better than softwood lumber in some cases. Another aspect could be the performance or the strength of steel. Maybe you want to span something a little bit larger than maybe you could do with a conventional softwood lumber option, and you want to utilize it for that. Whether it's my imagination's immediately going to Jay Leno in one of his garages, right? That just looks more like an auto dealership than anything. But having these large spans, but still needing to carry significant load above it. So I think the resilience conversation, protecting that asset, and then this overall strength of steel. But I wouldn't say it's a trend. I still think it's really accentuating the full benefits of a material type. You're muted again. You're muted again, Brian.
Boy, I got to keep on remembering to do that.
No, you're fine.
So, Brian, obviously, would be kind of respectful of your time here. We're looking at. So, kind of before we wrap up, Brian, I always like try to do is get a little better understanding about yourself. And, a little more go behind the curtain. So, Brian, when you're not working, when you're not out there advocating on behalf of steel, what are you doing?
Honestly, it may seem cliche for anybody that knows any fighting Texas Aggies, but I always kid with people to say if they have that ATM on their uniform or their jersey, I'm a fan and I'm probably going to watch it. But my wife, we're going to celebrate 25 years this summer. She keeps trying to tell me that I'm not a student anymore and that I need to get less invested in it. But with that, I love spending time with my family. Nancy and I, my wife, we like to investigate and find new fun places, even within our own city, right? Okay. Within DFW, whether it be places to go dine. Honestly, the Human Rights Museum downtown that just got finished, beautiful steel structure, by the way, kind of walking through that, Dealey Plaza for people that know the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So really just spending time with family and supporting my fighting Texas Aggies are my two favorite things to do.
There you go. Well, you mentioned food. So what are some of your favorite spots now in Dallas?
So we really like down in Deep Ellum, Vedora. It's a really good kind of Tex-Mex place. Whenever I have people come visit me from AISC or from outside of the area, it's usually a question of, do you want barbecue or do you want Tex-Mex? Because those are our two favorite things. Barbecue, you have Pecan Lodge down there in Deep Ellum that we really love. You also have what's the place right just further down? I can't think of the name, skipping me now. But then there's also
for Blacks.
Yes, Terry Black's. Terry Black's kind of a close 1 and 2 there. There's some other options that I really like. There's also a little kind of hole in the wall bar. I don't know if it's really a hole in the wall, but it's called Ebb and Flow down in Deep Ellum. It's great ambiance, kind of a small place, but Nancy and I really enjoy that. So just Brian, a couple.
Yeah. So maybe we're gonna start a fight here, but I'm curious because I got an opinion on this when it comes to barbecue. Pecan Lodge, good. Worth standing in line for that much long? I argue because I think Black's is solid. I think Lockhart's is solid, and I think even Heinz Barbecue is very solid. And those don't take the lines of Pecan Lodge. So
Heinz is really good. Their location when they built it just outside of Love Field. Quite honestly, I stop there frequently whenever I'm coming in and out of Love Field. Lockhart's is good. Are you talking about the one in downtown Plano?
Actually, the one in Bishop Arts. That's the first one that kind of came on the scene. And I know there's one in Plano as well, but I kind of default to Bishop Arts. But yeah, there's just I think our conversation is showing there's a lot of good barbecue options here in the Dallas-Fort Worth for sure.
Hopefully, we're going to encourage people to come to the DFW area to bolster our small businesses that produce barbecue.
Amen to that. Hey, Brian, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. This has been very informative for me, and I think very much for everybody in the crowd. And, please, if you have any questions regarding steel, you can find Brian Ward on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to respond back to any questions you might have. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you once again for attending Risk On, Risk Off. This has been another, I think, very fascinating conversation in respects to a segment of the construction industry and then how to think about resiliency and being more, sustainable respects to projects and how there's steel can incorporate into that overall picture. As always, if there's something that individual topic or an individual you'd like to see, or maybe you'd like to be on the show, please reach out to me. After about a week, I post these videos live so you actually post this on my YouTube channel, which you can find there and subscribe to at 60 Seconds of Risk. And you can always find these links at Twitter. Once again, this is Brian Hunt, Risk On, Risk Off. I appreciate your time and look forward to the next time together. All right, buddy.